Excellencies, distinguished experts, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to welcome you to this opening session of the eCommerce Week 2022. It is the first time since 2020 and an event that I know many have been waiting for. The past 2 years have been characterized by the COVID-19 pandemic, during which we have seen digitalization accelerate and more digital data flowing on the internet. At the same time, it has reminded us of the inequalities and the digital divides that hamper our ability to derive inclusive and sustainable development gains from digital transformation. This edition of the eCommerce Week could not be more timely. We have many things to discuss among member states and with other stakeholders. This UNCTAD conference provides precisely the platform we need for enabling a global multi-stakeholder dialogue on how to harness digital transformation in a manner that leaves no one behind, especially in an age where unprecedented challenges continue to require the international community's urgent attention. It is therefore a privilege for me to chair this opening session. I would like to introduce myself for those who do not know me. I am the permanent representative of the United Republic of Tanzania to the UN here in Geneva, and I'm also the president of the Trade and Development Board of UNCTAD. I should mention that this session is broadcast live and also being live streamed on UNCTAD Facebook. The session is being interpreted simultaneously into all 6 UN languages. In this opening session, we will hear from heads of United Nations organizations and leaders from non-governmental stakeholders who will share their collective views on what we should expect from this week and how we can build more resilient and inclusive digital economies and societies. To formally open the eCommerce Week, I have the pleasure to invite a video message from Ms. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. The video, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world is experiencing major challenges. The devastating impact of COVID-19 now risks being compounded by the war in Ukraine. In these unprecedented times, multilateralism and genuine partnerships are critically important. The eCommerce Week 2022 offers a rare opportunity for countries and stakeholders to come together to discuss a major new opportunity for sustainable development, data and digitalization. While digitalization represents a powerful force for good, enabling us to tackle development needs in novel ways, it also presents new challenges. Unless those challenges are addressed, digitalization could result in lower levels of trust in government, new inequalities, and even wider digital divides, including based on gender. Digital data is now a key strategic asset, creating both private and social value. The use of data has implications not just for trade and economic development, but for human rights and peace and security. How we deal with data will have a huge impact on our ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It is high time for member states, in dialogue with other stakeholders, to devise strategies for achieving the SDGs through enhanced multilateral governance of our global commons and global public goods. As the Secretary General has outlined in his report on our common agenda, data is no different from other global commons and global public goods. It should be governed as such. We need innovative approaches to governing data and the digital economy to ensure a more equitable distribution of the gains while addressing risks and concerns. I hope the United Nations governments, the private sector, and civil society can come together in preparation for the Summit of the Future next year to agree on a global digital compact. This eCommerce Week is a key step on this journey, as it offers a unique platform to discuss development opportunities and challenges associated with data and digitalization. I wish you all a fruitful conference.
I thank Ms. Amina Mohammed for her statements. Let me now turn to our three distinguished speakers who will share their perspectives on how different stakeholders can contribute to collectively address the overall topic of this year's eCommerce Week, data and digitalization for development. Our first speaker is Madame Isabella Duran, Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. Miss, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame l'ambassadrice.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. I will be speaking in French. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellencies, ministers, dear speakers, colleagues. It is a very great pleasure for me to welcome you to this 2022 edition of the eCommerce Week. It is the 7th time that UNCTAD is organizing it in Geneva. Since its first edition, the digital economy, and we will notice this, has experienced a blinding development and has increased its share in GDP. Based on how we consider or measure it, this share could in fact reach 30% of GDP. Blockchains, data analysis, artificial intelligence, the internet with respect to objects, automation and robotics, what we call cloud computing, just to mention a few, are many areas which have profoundly transformed our societies and our economies, and they continue to do so. The pandemic has made a major contribution to this digital revolution. Online sales account for a growing share of all of retail sales. Teleworking and teleconferences are now part of our working world and working mode and our interaction. We note a greater dependence with respect to services provided by digital means. New applications have been developed to search for contacts. And lastly, and this is significant, data sharing has been essential in order to ensure the rapid development of vaccinations. Yes, data are at the very heart of the digital economy. They are the basic resource of a new value chain. They are collected, stored, analyzed, and transformed into artificial intelligence and then sold on. The data market is enormous, but we know that the geographical distribution of platforms that depend on this based on their stock exchange capitalization is very unequal. Furthermore, this concentration of major platforms and their profits in China and in the US are not really in line with the traditional North-South split. As Amina Mohammed recalled earlier, these data must become a public good. Furthermore, this digital divide also takes on several dimensions. Today, added to the divide linked to connectivity, we have an emerging divide in terms of data. This reflects major differences between countries and within those countries as regards their ability to use the data. Those that cannot transform the data into artificial intelligence and trade opportunities left behind by users' traces, those cannot transform them into opportunities are clearly at a disadvantage. They're unable to use these data as part of their economic and social development. That is why the e-commerce week this year has precisely chosen to underscore the importance of these data and data cross-border flows in terms of socioeconomic development. As many of you will perhaps recall, this was also the topic of the report on the digital economy last year. Ladies and gentlemen, the digital era calls for major changes in our legal and tax frameworks, in our competition and consumer protection policies. but also calls for changes in the trade logistics, and indirectly it provides new prospects in terms of entrepreneurship. Trade negotiations must also adapt to this new era, in particular as regards e-commerce. However, let's also be well aware that digital development is not neutral from an ecological standpoint. The digital sphere is costly to the environment. Whenever we download an email, we contribute to the warming of the planet. Whenever we tweet, carry out research, consult a web page, we are creating pollution. And paradoxically, therefore, the digital sphere is also the physical sphere. Data centers are not in the cloud. They are on land in massive physical buildings which are full of consumers that consume a great deal of energy. All of this seems invisible, it seems cheap, free of charge, but it's not. And this is something that we need to seriously bear in mind when developing and using digital tools. And indeed, one of our sessions will be devoted to this issue. Lastly, strategic decisions are also necessary as regards the storage of data, digital payments, and the availability of skills. And regardless of the issue addressed, we must ensure that it is always linked to sustainable development. Over this week, you will have the choice and opportunity to have access to over 100 sessions. And in fact, this is the largest e-commerce week to date. And I would like to express my very sincere thanks to all of the partners and organizers of sessions this year. They represent a very large scale, a range of governments, international organizations, private bodies, and civil society organizations. It wouldn't have been possible to schedule such a detailed and varied program without their very fruitful and numerous cooperation. I'd like to extend my thanks in particular to our partners from eTrade for All. This year, 31 out of the 34 members of eTrade for All actively contribute to at least one of the sessions. And that is what I would call a partnership based on action. I'm particularly pleased to note that a number of partner organizations are represented at the highest level. This doesn't mean, of course, that other partners from other levels are less important. Nonetheless, the commitment there is significant. For those of you who would like to have more information about the eTrade for All initiative and its members, I would request you to participate in the high-level session tomorrow morning, Geneva time. One of our close partners in this context is the Diplo Foundation. I'm very pleased that Jovan Kubalia, who will not be physically present but remotely present, the executive director, is joining us today, and I will listen to him, as always, with a great deal of attention and interest. I'm also pleased to announce that the International Chamber of Trade, represented here by the Secretary General, will become the official partner of the private sector for the eTrade for All initiative.
Il sera aussi avec nous virtuellement.
Mr. Denton will also be with us virtually. Most of the sessions, as you will have noted, will be virtual because the renovation of the Palais des Nations and the ongoing pandemic have limited our ability to invite you here physically. Nonetheless, I'm very pleased to note many faces in the room, and those of you who are in Geneva, I would ask you to please attend the meetings in the room. Let me mention the fifth session of the Intergovernmental Group of Experts on e-trade and the digital economy, which will be held from the 27th to the 29th of April at the end of the week in a hybrid mode. This time, it will be devoted to the role of digitalization during the pandemic and during the recovery phase. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in these difficult times, it's more important than ever to pool our strength and to seek out ways to cooperate. And this is what we're going to do in coming days. The success of this week, to a great extent, will depend on all session organizations, partners, participants, and will ensure that they make a contribution. A working modality is at the heart of the open source approach that we prioritize. So I'd ask you to enjoy this week, I'd ask you to find areas of understanding, to seek out innovative solutions to ensure that the digital economy is a shared vector of prosperity. And this is what we all hope for each other. And this is the very desire of the team who has been working for a great deal of time to prepare for this week. And they deserve a round of applause, whether they be physical or virtual.
Merci de votre attention. Et
Thank you for your attention, and I'll give back the floor to Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Duran, for your welcoming remarks. I'm now pleased to welcome Mr. John Denton as our next speaker. Mr. Denton is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Denton, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And can I send warm greetings to all our friends in Tanzania through you? We are actually working very closely with the Tanzanian Chambers of Commerce right now on a whole bunch of initiatives, particularly around developing entrepreneurship in Tanzania. So it's a delight to be able to participate on this panel with you as the president, and also a big shout out to the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. I do have to say that I'm at the moment part of the United Nations Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group, which Amina, who spoke first, is currently coordinating while the Secretary General is on this very important trip to Moscow and to Kiev in order to see if he can establish grounds and an opportunity for peace. And Amina is doing a wonderful job steering the Global Crisis Group. But the Global Crisis Group, of course, is coordinated very effectively by your Director General, Rebecca Greenspan. And I've had the pleasure of working with Rebecca before when she was at CEGIB. And I have to say that it's a great honor, but also a delight to watch her and participate with her and collaborate with her in this incredibly important work around the Global Crisis Response Group, because we are determined to ensure that the global world is not left in a situation where there is crisis in food, crisis in energy, and crisis in finance without us doing something about it. And as the ICC, we are honored, but also we actually feel the need to be involved in these issues. I note from the chat already that we have a number of representatives from Ukraine participating today. I shout out to you. You may not be aware, but the ICC is very present in Ukraine with ICC Ukraine. And also we coordinate all the chambers of commerce, and there are still functioning 25 chambers of commerce in Ukraine. And one of our jobs is to continue to ensure that the private sector operates within the Ukraine. 50% is still operating at a pretty effective level, 30% at reduced level, and around 20% has actually collapsed. But our job is to keep the economic front alive. And we will work continually with those on the ground who represent the private sector to enable that. And there's a bunch of things we're pushing at the moment, including the establishment of an ICC Center of Entrepreneurship for Ukraine, which is designed to help not only the private sector continue to function, but also in the extraordinary almost 5 million person refugee diaspora, bring skills and capabilities and opportunities to build entrepreneurial futures for a number of the people who are simply stuck now outside the Ukrainian border in Poland and elsewhere. So we are doing that, and we look forward to collaboration with anyone who's engaged in the pursuit of peace through effective commercial arrangements, peace through the effectiveness of the private sector, and peace through the application of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is another reason why I'm so glad to be here today. Because the Sustainable Development Goals, as we know, bring together all stakeholders, including the private sector. And what it says is we must all be involved in addressing global challenges. I can't think of a global challenge before us now that can be served and addressed without the full engagement of the private sector. And we at the ICC bring that. And that it most certainly, as I think as the Deputy Director General has also said, is the case as we consider how to harness digitalization to find solution for these extraordinary challenges we see. How can we, as representatives of the private sector, best contribute to bridging digital and data divides? And moreover, developing adequate policy responses to digitalization. Top of mind for me, as the leader of the institutional representative of more than 45 million businesses globally in more than 170 countries. And I should also stress that over 2/3 of our members are in what would now be called vulnerable economies as a consequence of the existing crisis we have, with not only with COVID, but now with the totally unnecessary crisis initiated by Russia in Ukraine. This is now causing huge problems in the developing world, and more than 2/3 of our members sit within that constituency. And so from our point of view, when we look at the issue of digitalization and bridging that divide, we've got to approach it holistically. First, we must all strive to create an inclusive, enabling environment for digital technology across policy, legal, and regulatory dimensions. And second, we must do this through collaboration with the UN and its many agencies, with the multilateral development banks, which frankly need to step up a lot more than they are in this area, with industry associations, and with civil society, and of course with the private sector. By the way, we welcome the involvement of civil society. We work collaboratively with civil society because the effectiveness of the civil society and private sector working with government and other institutions can never be underestimated. And we see that that's critical in this particular area. Digital connectivity, my friends, has rapidly become one of the most defining features of our everyday lives. The way we study, the way we work, the way we do business, and the way we consume content or connect with other communities and with our own communities. The COVID-19 pandemic, as the Deputy Director General has said, clearly showed the value of such connectivity, how it could foster societal resistance in the face of the ongoing crisis. And let's face it, the COVID-19 pandemic is not over. What we need to do now is learn how to work with it and live with it in an effective way. And a lot of that will require the access to digital tools. And so enabling many people to continue their usual economic and social activities during the worldwide lockdowns of 2020 and 2021 was made possible by access to digital tools. However, this lifeline was only available to those who possess three key ingredients of meaningful connectivity. The first is robust infrastructure, the second is relevant digital service, and the third is effective skills. Today, we know that 94%, that's right, 94% of the world's population is covered by a mobile broadband network. This has effectively reduced the number of people living in areas without mobile broadband network to about 450 million. However, the International Telecommunications Union estimates that only 63% of the global population, that's around 4.9 billion, were actually using the internet last year, with some 2.9 billion people still remaining offline. This is just not acceptable, and we cannot allow this clear inequality to persist. Dedicated and effective actions are needed on both the supply and demand side of connectivity and throughout the entire digital ecosystem. That ecosystem consists of three layers. The first is infrastructure, the second is applications, and the third is skills. The public and private sectors must work as partners in enabling digital transformation of society. Business has the opportunity to serve as a trusted interlocutor to governments and all stakeholders. Our simple aim must be to improve our understanding of how information and communication technologies work in practice. Our second is to co-create incentives for investment in innovation. And thirdly, to co-design frameworks that enable connectivity, encourage competition, and encourage innovation. In this context, I'd like to emphasize four key building blocks we see for an enabling policy environment. The first is a stable legal and regulatory environment that welcomes new investment, fosters competition, and supports digital skilling. Second, we want to see open markets and the free flow of data across borders. The third, we want a holistic, whole-of-government approach to policy making, an approach that takes into account all relevant economic, technical, social, and governance issues. And last, and most importantly, we want to see multi-stakeholder partnerships, as I described before. ICC will actively participate during this eCommerce Week 2022, including by hosting panels on data governance and trust, and on the ICC Digital Standards Initiative, which I launched in Singapore just some 2 years ago and has already made enormous progress in bringing some sense to the way in which the digital world is governed. And I'm very pleased to conclude by announcing that ICC will deepen its engagement with UNCTAD And why wouldn't we? An organization led by Rebecca and by the Deputy Director General, with so many great people participating in it, tells us this is an organization to work with. And we want to work with UNCTAD even more closely on addressing digitalization challenges. ICC has agreed to act as the business focal point in the E-Trade for All initiative to bring the voice of the private sector into discussions on how to make e-commerce and the digital economy more inclusive. As UNCTAD's private sector counterpart, ICC will be a trusted, neutral, and global channel, bringing together the voices of SMEs and all businesses from throughout our global network to E-Trade for All in a systematic and coherent fashion. I'm very proud to be joining this high-level discussion today under your leadership, Madam President, and I only want to participate as much as possible in all these discussions. And I'll be part of the discussion tomorrow, partnering with you all in this initiative. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. And thank you very much for all those who are participating in this very important discussion. But what we want to see are actions, and actions that the ICC will help deliver. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denton, for your eloquent remarks. It is clear that having a constructive involvement of private sector is essential to build an inclusive digital economy. I would now like to invite our third speaker of this session, Mr. Jovan Kubalija, who is the Executive Director of the Diplo Foundation, which is based here in Geneva. Diplo is, among other things, a member of E-Trade for All. It operates the Geneva Internet platform and operates the Digital Watch online observatory. Diplo Foundation is also providing much support to the eCommerce Week this year. Mr. Kubalija, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's really great honor to be today addressing your meeting, especially to be at the UNCTAD, and I will tell you why it is particularly relevant and interesting organization for us. But let me start with a bit of a slightly broader context. Yesterday, we announced or celebrate, if you can tell it, Multilateralism Day. Definitely, it's not time for big parties and celebration, but it is time for reflections and to see where we are, we today at the UN, you in the room and we online, and what is the current situation. We have, let's say, bad news and good news. And I'll start framing my intervention around these two aspects. Bad news is definitely that we have a crisis of multilateralism for different reasons, including the question of weaponizing interdependence, wars, conflicts, and I'm sure that all in this meeting are aware and can make the long list. This is bad news. Good news is that internet has survived so far all disruptions in the crisis of multilateralism and globalism. Still today, person from Moscow or Kiev can send email to his counterpart or relative because they have so many connections in other country. Internet is one of the few global infrastructures that survive the current war and overall crisis. And it brings me to the question of e-commerce, what we discussed today. Even at the time of the worst crisis in the history of humanity, the trade continued and people were exchanging goods and services across national borders. And we as a generation have a huge responsibility that we don't endanger this great legacy of humanity, legacy of trade and commerce, and legacy of diplomacy, legacy of engaging with the others, seeing others as somebody with whom you can build better society, better life, healthier life, not seeing them as enemy across the border. It is a great interplay and great message of interplay between trade, commerce, and diplomacy. Now, this is a broader canvas for today's discussion. And let me focus on the what, at least in my view, we need to do today. We need to have discussion with utmost clarity, intellectual, political, and human, because it is not a time for empty phrases. It's not a time for just rhetorics. It's a time for action. And it was already highlighted by Deputy Secretary General and Mr. Dannon in their interventions. And here we have some good news and my explanation why I'm happy to be at UNCTAD event. UNCTAD was one of the first, basically after the World Bank, maybe second organization, which wrote a report, 2021 report on e-commerce, with utmost clarity of the language, with the statistics, data showing that we have a problem to address, especially around data. And that is, I think, one of the most quoted reports of international organizations. We are doing a sort of X-ray of international organization, and by far it is one of the most quoted reports. One of the reasons is that it is really, if I can use this term, brutally honest and clear report. This is the first message, and I'll just come back to the few points from that report and overall discussion later on. The other important element is this platform, eTrade for All. We are gathering together once a year, but not only once a year, between the sessions, exchange views, agree, sometimes disagree, sometimes having a turf battle, who is going to do what on capacity development or training. But this is one bazaar, and we need a bazaar. Bazaar is the core of trade, commerce, and diplomacy, if you want. Place where we engage, learn from each other, develop empathy, develop new ideas, develop new projects. And let me just focus on 2 points from the report on this experience from e-commerce and for trade, and also experience from our work at Diplo. Data is a powerful tool, but it is not a panacea. And data has to be managed carefully. The default point should be that we have a free flow of data, as it has been highlighted in many discussions. But we can manage a caveats and situation where that general principle should be complemented. When we speak about privacy protection, when we speak about security, and when we speak about development. These three aspects have to be carefully managed if we want, as a humanity, not as individual companies in those days, want to benefit from data. And we have already heard quite a few points where data or digital is a sort of ghost SDG. Basically, if we want to realize SDGs, it's 11th or ghost SDG, cross-cutting everything. We have to use much more data. Now, in this spirit of the UNCTAD report, a need for clarity and discussion, we have to address these three caveats to the free flow of data: privacy, security, and development. Now, we are not in a very good moment currently because there is a growing suspicion about interdependence. And we, when I say we in this meeting, in situ and online, have to put a lot of efforts to explain to our citizens, companies, countries, leaders, that this decision is not utopian decision how we manage data. It's very practical decision impacting our society. And we have to make trade-offs. In principle, we can cut our country from the internet and data flows, but it brings the costs. It brings the cost of grandma in Balkans or Africa connecting to their grandchildren in the United States. We have a huge migration. This is becoming social network. It brings the cost to the question of development, economic development. Therefore, all of us, from citizens to companies and countries and international community, have to have honest discussion with a clear understanding of trade-offs. What we may gain in short term if we affect free flow of data, and what we will lose. In my personal opinion, we would lose a lot. But that discussion, what we can lose, should not be just covered by empty phrases, sometimes utopian. It should be very concrete. What countries are gaining from free flow of data? What are the ways to protect their interests? And this is the right moment. We are at the right place during this e-commerce work. And I would like to close with that sort of awareness that we as a generation are addressing the issues that previous generations addressed more or less well, of preserving trade and commerce, as a life sort of line or blood of the modern society. If there is no circulation of goods, services, ideas, and diplomacy, our body, metaphorically, of humanity will collapse. This is the blood of our society. In order to do that, we need to have, like with the good doctors, good, fair, and clear diagnosis of what's going on. Do not, without going into desperation, because situation is, we are facing crisis, but motivating us to find new solutions, and they exist. And many of them exist in documents like UNCTAD 2021 report, in creative potentials of people who are in this room, of creative potentials of people who we have to outreach yet in marginalized communities, in societies worldwide. Just think about creative ideas coming from let's say, Africa, in e-commerce, in the local development. That is important to bring all of these views. And I'm really honored, personally, and on behalf of Diplo Foundation and Geneva Internet Platform, to be part of this important event. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kubalija, for your remarks. I believe these opening remarks have done an excellent job in setting the scene for what I expect will be a most interesting week. It is my hope that the 100 sessions or so of intense dialogue will enable us to consider new and innovative ideas and ways of dealing with data and digitalization. This will have to involve governance of the collection, sharing, and use of data for development, developing digital development strategies and the policies, and the greater efforts to bridge the growing digital and the data divides. Let me thank all of you, of our distinguished speakers, for their valuable remarks. I would also like to thank all organizations that are contributing to the organization of the many exciting sessions during this week. Finally, I would like to thank the UNCTAD Secretariat for your major efforts for making it possible to convene the eCommerce Week 2022. I will conclude by wishing all participants a very interesting, interactive, and informative eCommerce Week 2022. Thank you for your attention. The session is closed.